Hello, grade 7, and today, after our last travel to Mexico, we are going down south to Brazil. I hope you're done with your homework about the countries of the Caribbean region and Central America. Okay, and now it's time for us to have a closer look at South America. We will talk about Brazil today. Brazil, the country of samba and capoeira, if you've ever heard about these things. And first of all, you will need your books, don't forget. It's page 236 for us for the beginning, and off we go. So, geography played an important role in the colonization of South America by Spain and Portugal. The two European powers reached an agreement to divide South America in a very interesting way, and we are going to talk about it in a couple of minutes. But first, I will ask you to look at this physical map of Brazil, the same way I asked you to look at physical map of Mexico last time. Okay, so now look at this map of Brazil, and what landforms can you see? Let's see what we can see. Now, first of all, the colors, even though here we can see something looking like mountains, the color of these mountains is never as dark as the color of the mountains in Mexico, right? Or later we will see that this part here will be way much darker in terms of high altitude than here. So, but nonetheless, we have some mountains and some highland plateaus here, which only causes us to see a better contrast here with the Amazon River basin, which flows lower than this area and which is also greener, which indicates that it is full of vegetation. And you need to remember our lesson last week about vegetation and climate of Latin America, especially South America. Okay, now I will offer you these two maps, the same physical map that you had a look on just a minute ago, and another, the population density map here. And if you remember how to read the population density map, you can easily notice very interesting thing. Which parts of Brazil are more densely populated? Indeed, the parts closer to the Atlantic Ocean, these parts, right? So these parts are populated while the rest of the country has less than 10 people per square mile. That is interesting, isn't it? How do you think? Why? Okay. We will have a video. We will watch this video and we will see if this video answers the question of why on the population map.
Larger in landmass than the contiguous United States, Brazil borders every country on the South American continent except Ecuador and Chile. Three features define Brazil's geography: the Amazon basin, tropical savanna, and the Brazilian highlands. The Amazon River and rainforest, the world's largest, encompass most of northern Brazil and make this region inhospitable to agriculture and large populations. To its south lies the Cerrado, a vast tropical savanna. Advances in agricultural practices have allowed large-scale farming to thrive in this region. However, due to distance and geography, Brazil faces daunting challenges in getting agricultural commodities to international markets. The Brazilian highlands and the narrow strip of land between the mountains and the coast are home to the majority of the country's 197 million people. Most of the country's economic activity occurs in this region. Brazil's geography largely shields it from external military threats. The Atlantic Ocean, the Amazon Basin, and the buffer states of Bolivia, Paraguay, and Uruguay insulate the country. Brazil's varied regions have made centralized control and integration difficult for the core states of Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, and Minas Gerais. Infrastructure linking the coast and the interior, as well as connecting the various coastal cities, is technically difficult and requires high levels of investment. Isolated from the rest of the continent both geographically and linguistically, and lacking internal cohesion, Brazil has traditionally been inward-looking. Brazil's primary geographic challenge is consolidating control over its vast peripheral territory and connecting these regions more efficiently with its population centers and ports.
So, in the video you saw that this area is more populated, and about 170 million people live here. And just to tell you about the total population of Brazil is about 200 million people. So technically 170 million people live here, or rather here, okay, and only the rest 30 million live here in these areas. Why so? Geographically, because this area, the Amazon River basin, with its forests, you know, with the jungle and the animals and insects and everything, is very inhospitable for living there. While this area, even though you see on this map, this area is kinda populated, still this area is only good for agriculture. And another thing, the main cities are all located on the strip of land next to the sea, followed by mountains. Even though these mountains are not as high as Cordilleras or the Andes, still they are mountains. And to connect these cities on the sea coast with the inland areas requires a lot of work, road works, and these road works will need a lot of money. So right now Brazil is working on the inland migration, and we will read and talk about inland migration a bit later today. So, and by the way, what is this red spot here and pretty dark spot to that? Actually, if you look at the map of Brazil on page 216, find yourself for us, please. Okay, so it doesn't have the map. So, then you will go to the map of Latin America in the beginning of this unit, and it will be page 193, and you will see that this very dark spot here, where is my cursor here? The very dark spot here indicates new capital of Brazil, Brasilia, and we will read later why in the mid 20th century Brazil moved its capital inside the country from the coast. Okay, now you will look at this map. Do you like it? It looks very colorful, but you can't see any features. You know why? Because I still didn't press this button. Okay, now you can see Brazil with all the cities and everything on it. So okay, now again, here is Brasilia, the capital city of the country, okay, but it only became capital in the mid 20th century, about say 65-70 years ago, okay, and before that all the life of the country was concentrated here on this. You can see this light green strips of land along the sea coast. Okay, so now the biggest cities were Sao Paulo, Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, okay, and now the third big city is Brasilia, and as the capital, obviously, it's one of the biggest cities in the country. Okay, now again here you can see even here along the Amazon River you can see some white spots and dots indicating towns and cities. Okay, so black dots show just small cities. White spots show kinda main cities, or let's say administrative centers of certain areas. Okay, and there is even red city on the Amazon River, Manaus, right? So Manaus here and Belém here, both cities even house airports, so you can fly there from the coast, which makes life for these people easier, people who live in Manaus especially. Okay, so because for them the main means of transportation still is the river, up and down the stream. People travel by boats. Okay, but if they need to go to like bigger cities as Brasilia or say Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro, they have to take the plane, because travel by the river and sea will take too long, let alone by car. Okay, now what language do they speak in Brazil? I expect you would say Spanish or Brazilian. Well, watch this video to find out, and also you will learn something about the history of Brazil. So while watching, I will ask you about two things. First of all, what language do they speak in Brazil? And second, here you have a list of things, okay, like something related to Portugal, Treaty of Tordesillas, line of demarcation, Brazil wood, sugar, native population, African slaves, and independence. Okay, so watch this video and tell me later what is the significance of these things. Okay, now language and these things.
During the opening ceremony of the 2016 Summer Games, more than 10,000 athletes from 207 teams paraded into the Rio de Janeiro stadium. But many viewers were puzzled as the teams appeared to have come out in the wrong order. In fact, it was alphabetical order according to the native language of Brazil, which is Portuguese. Brazil is the only country in Latin America that uses Portuguese, not Spanish, as its primary language. So why do Brazilians speak Portuguese? Well, it all stems back to the late 15th century, when Christopher Columbus and other voyagers were exploring the Atlantic. Soon after Columbus discovered the New World, Spain rushed to secure sovereignty over it before any other countries, namely Portugal, could do the same. So in 1494, Spain and Portugal signed the Treaty of Tordesillas, which divided their claims along the line of demarcation. Spain was given exclusive rights to all lands west of the line, while Portugal was free to conquer anything to the east. This arrangement paved the way for Spain to colonize much of what is today Latin America, which is why those countries speak Spanish. Meanwhile, Portugal was only given a sliver of land off the Atlantic, what is today the east coast of Brazil. Although present-day Brazil was officially discovered and claimed by Portugal in the year 1500, the Portuguese left it largely unoccupied until around 1530. The country's renewed interest in the region was due to Brazil wood, a unique tree found on the coast that can be processed into bright red dye. This is, as you might guess, how Brazil got its name. But interestingly, Brazil wood didn't turn out to be all that significant to Brazil's development. Instead, the colony's cash crop was sugarcane. In the late 16th century, sugar was in high demand, and Brazil's economy relied heavily on it. So when other European powers began competing with Brazil's monopoly, Brazilian plantation owners began migrating inland in search of more fertile land. Through these expeditions, gold was discovered, and in the late 1600s, a gold rush ensued. This led to further expansion, and over the next century, the borders of modern Brazil were drawn. Roughly a century later, Brazil gained full independence. Of course, the Portuguese didn't really discover Brazil. When they first arrived, millions of indigenous people were already living in the region. The Portuguese enslaved the native population almost immediately. However, when tensions flared between native groups and colonizers, the Portuguese began importing slaves from Africa. Over the course of roughly 3 centuries, Brazil imported an estimated 4 million African slaves, so many that at one point they outnumbered immigrants 5-1. As history unfolded, what was once European Portuguese adopted bits and pieces of dialects from other languages, first from natives, then from African slaves, and finally European immigrants. Today, Brazilian and European Portuguese have slight differences in grammar and vocabulary and major differences in pronunciation. Nevertheless, the languages remain very similar. If you're
Okay, so now, the language they speak in Brazil is Portuguese, even though with some differences from European Portuguese. Okay, now, about the significance of these things, you can, so if you still cannot explain the importance or significance of these things, you can watch this video once again, or you can read History, a Divided Continent in your book on page 236, 237, and find the answers there. Okay, so you will take your 5 or 7 minutes to either rewatch the video or to read about the same things in your books. Press pause now and do it. Now, about national culture. The culture of Brazil includes Portuguese influences, Native American elements, African influences, but unlike other South American countries, Brazil has had more success in blending its ethnic groups. When the first Europeans arrived in 1500s, millions of native people lived in what is now Brazil, but today only about 200,000 live in the depths of the Amazon rainforest, which means Europeans technically destroyed the local population. Thousands of native people died from diseases brought by the European colonists, and you remember smallpox in Mexico. When Spanish people came, they brought with them that disease, and the immune system of local people were not ready for smallpox. Similar thing happened here in Brazil. Brazil has become home to many immigrants from other nationalities as well. Large numbers of people from Portugal, Germany, Italy and Spain have settled there, as have immigrants from Lebanon and Syria. Brazil also has the largest Japanese population outside Japan. The Portuguese brought their own language, and along with that they also brought Catholic religion to Brazil. Today Brazil has the largest Catholic population in the world. In addition, Protestants make up almost 20% of the population. Many other Brazilians, mainly those of African or mixed ancestry, practice religions that combine African beliefs with Catholicism. You can also read about Brazilian national culture in your book on page 237. And by looking at this chart here, pie chart, you can see which countries brought or affected or influenced Brazilian culture more. Like the biggest influence comes from Portuguese people. Then Native American people and African people influenced modern Brazil's culture approximately equally. Then there was quite a big influence from Italy in the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. The rest nations, like people from Germany, from Spain, and from Lebanon, Syria, and Japan, they influenced, but their influence was not as big as the first 4 countries. Now, about the economic state of the country today. So we call Brazil an economic giant of Latin America. And just by looking at this map, you may have a clue why, you may have a guess why we call it an economic giant. Okay, so you look at this map first, and then you will read about Brazilian industrial power on page 238, and in your notebooks you will make a list of the main forms of Brazilian economic activity. It can be in the form of a table like I suggested here. For example, you will write agriculture, natural resources and industry, and in this table you will just list the types or names of activities. Like for example, in agriculture, just by looking at the map you can write coffee, and when you see coffee is here, coffee, and it's also marked brown, and you can see here on the map that this region is famous for its coffee production. Then also in agriculture you can write cocoa beans, chocolate, right? And this is the area famous for chocolate. And also you can see rice here, and rice grows here in this part of Brazil, and on and on and on and on. You will write these names down in the table, but in your notebooks, and when you are done with this break you will come back to school and you will grace me with all your precious notebooks. Okay, so you will have 20 minutes to do this exercise. Okay, map and text, page 238. Pause now. Our next part is migration. We have 2 texts on the same page, 238. Read 2 short texts about migration in Brazil and answer 2 questions, or answer 1 question. What might be positive and negative sides of the processes described in these articles? Okay, so first of all, again, you will feel it as a table. This time I'm not asking you to find the exact answers in the book. I'm asking you to think what might be possible positive effects of people migrating to the city, and what might be possible negative effect or effects of the same process. And the same here, what might be possible positive effects of people migrating inside the country, and what might be negative effects of the same process. Okay, you read and you think, and for that you will have like 10 minutes. Okay, for example, I'm just giving you one example. One positive effect of people going to settle inside the country, which actually happened which started in 1950s, 1960s, when the capital of Brazil was moved from the seashore to the inner parts of the country, to Brasilia, the city of Brasilia, as I mentioned before. Okay, so it brought the increase of population in those areas, and we can see it as positive effect. But on the other hand, as negative effect, we can see that the increasing number of people in that part of the country also affected the natural habitat of many animals, because the roads that were built in the country, they destroyed the habitat of many wild animals there. Many rivers and swamps were dried down to allow people to live there, but at the same time this process destroyed again the homes of thousands, if not millions, of big and small animals who lived there before. Okay, so these are the positive, just examples of positive and negative effects of people moving inside the country. And to illustrate the first table about migration to the city, from countryside to the city, to illustrate this table, I prepared two following videos for you to watch. So, first video: with all the people coming to live in Rio de Janeiro, the city turned into a real pearl of a city. The city looks so beautiful. Just have a look. Okay, so you all can easily see that with all the people coming in to live in Rio de Janeiro, the city sprawled along the coast, and it's huge, it's very big, it's very beautiful, right? Okay, and when you watch this video, you may be thinking like, wow, I would like to live there too, or at least I would like to go and visit that place as a tourist for like a week or two. And this is exactly what the international travel websites want you to think about. But what they forgot to show you in this video is the opposite side of the same coin. Because many people, when they come to live in Rio de Janeiro in hopes of better life, in hopes of beautiful life there, they may not find that beautiful life. And they will live in different parts of the city that are far from being that beautiful, even though they do have their own beauties. Here,
if you go to a Google map of Rio de Janeiro and put it into 3D mode, you can see what the city looks like as it was designed by urban planners. But you'll notice parts of the city that don't look like the rest. See the difference? The people who live in these parts of the city with the clean lines and the well thought out design are called people of the asphalt. The people who live in these parts of the city are called people of the hill. Even though the people of the asphalt and the people of the hill live closely intertwined throughout the city, they live vastly different lives. These informal communities that look like houses stacked on top of each other, sprouting out of the jungle, are called favelas, home to both vicious drug gangs as well as some of the most peaceful, creative, and resourceful people in Rio. I want to show you what they look like on the inside. A favela is a community that was built without any oversight of a public authority. No zoning, no building codes, no public services. These places just kind of grew out of the hills over time thanks to two main factors. First was slavery. Brazil imported 11 times more slaves than the United States did, and Rio alone was home to more slaves than the entire American South. Slavery ended in 1888, and free slaves, still denied many rights in society, built these informal communities on their own. In more recent times, favelas have been fueled by massive migrations from rural Brazilians coming into the city looking for work. Not able to find affordable housing, these workers built their own communities. Today, 25% of Rio's residents live in these favelas. I spent time in 6 of Rio's favelas to try to figure out what happens when parts of a city develop without the presence of a government. This is Rocinha. It's Brazil's largest favela, and it has been dubbed a city within a city. It's a completely self-sufficient economy, the result of decades of makeshift solutions to basic needs like electricity and running water. Without a formal government presence, the residents of Rocinha created their own association, which helps coordinate public projects and resources. Since these associations grew up totally informally by people who had no training in public administration, the resulting community design brings with it a little more zest and creativity than your traditional city. But make no mistake, Rocinha is a full-on, functioning mini-city within the city of Rio de Janeiro. This impromptu resourcefulness is common within favelas. Here I am in Vidigal, a favela not far from Rocinha. This man Paulo is showing me his garden, but it wasn't always a garden. 15 years ago, this hill that we stand on was teeming with garbage. Paulo decided to clean it up, planting trees and cultivating a garden space that now produces fruit. He did this without asking permission because, after all, there was no one to ask permission from. If you look around the garden, you'll realize that everything is made from trash. On the other side of the city is a favela called Maré. People in this community have created art centers for young people to come and learn new skills. They also support established artists to create projects around the city that explore and communicate life in the favela. Here they are building a model of their favela out of recycled wood. In Providencia, a favela near the port zone, I met up with this guy, Mauricio, a photographer who lives in this amazing house. Mauricio photographs life in the favela and provides transparency to the good and the bad of these places. He thinks of photography as a weapon to fight against everything from drug cartels to the government when they show up trying to remove parts of his community. Whenever he sees corruption or foul play in his community, he photographs it and distributes it to a network of local and international media contacts. Over the years, people have learned not to mess with him.
É sempre brigando. Então, essa é uma arma que dói muito neles. A fotografia dói muito neles. Você resolve muito fácil com a fotografia.
So why are these people who live in poverty and neglect so driven to create beauty in order to survive?
É porque você sempre espera pelo poder público. E o poder público nunca está pronto para você, porque se a gente não fizer aqui, não é eles que vão vir aqui fazer.
As coisas são mais permitidas. E outro é um lugar muito esquecido.
This reality of neglect from public investment has created a culture of creative survival. But there's a dark side to this too.
So right now we're traveling over Complexo de Alemão, which is a huge complex or block of favelas. We're not going into the streets today because this place is still very much run by drug trafficking gangs. I would be sugarcoating the situation if I didn't talk about the fact that drug gangs still have major influence in a lot of the favelas, and Alemão is one of those places.
Perhaps the most powerful gang in Rio is called the Red Command, a group that began as a left-wing political rebellion and whose headquarters are here in Alemão. Cocaine arrived in Rio in the 1980s, enriching the gangs and allowing them to grow in power and territory. The Red Command became more violent and lost its political ideology, focusing entirely on drug and arms trafficking.
The fact that favelas are informal and unregulated, it means both that they can become incredibly vibrant because people can take this attitude and build on qualities and be creative and change your environment, but it also means that you can get incredibly dysfunctional places when the energy and the kind of approach is the opposite. So you have these two extremes and they come out of the same force of kind of informality and lack of regulation and kind of flexibility.
In 2008, the city of Rio was ready to take over the lawless territories of Rio. They assembled a special force of police officers to enter the favelas and drive out the gang influence. They called this process pacification of the favelas. But this gets tricky really fast. There's been this big discussion in the United States about police brutality, but Brazil is on a whole different level when it comes to police violence and corruption. Human Rights Watch estimates that US police kill 1 person for every 37,000 arrests. In Rio, they say that number is 1 in every 23 arrests. So you can see why some felt skeptical of letting the police come into the favelas to try to restore order. This is Santa Marta. It's the first favela that received pacification forces back in 2008. It also happens to be the place where Michael Jackson decided to shoot a music video.
É muito violento. A comunidade muito violenta, um poder armado muito forte. Aqui, né? Tinha dia de tiroteio começar de manhã e terminar à noite, em pleno praça. Depois da pacificação, foi a zero. Chegou a zero.
Pacification worked for Santa Marta and a few other favelas for the first few years after 2008. But this favela is small, and the city dedicated its best police forces to the job. It's been a whole different experience in places like Alemão and other bigger favelas. Many of the favelas that I visited that had apparently been pacified were very clearly still under the influence of the Red Command. So while there have been some successes in pacification, the city still has a huge challenge ahead of it in taking control of these places. International attention paid to favelas is usually directed towards the conflict between the gangs and the police. There's movies and video games about this. This problem has been perhaps disproportionately amplified across the world. But while gang violence is certainly a problem, it represents one small slice of the favela experience. What seems to me as the more striking and interesting aspect of favelas are the thousands of men and women who are thriving in creative ways, in spite of being neglected by their government.
You can read more about modern life in Brazil and in Rio de Janeiro on page 239. As for our travel to Brazil, I believe it's over, and now here comes your little homework. First of all, you may revise the lesson about Brazil and extend your knowledge about this country by looking back at pages 236-239. Second thing, you will read about Spanish-speaking countries of South America on pages 230-235, which will be your new stuff, okay, so it means you need to read them properly. And while reading, again, you will try to compare these countries to Mexico and Brazil. Are these countries similar to Mexico and Brazil or very different from them in terms of history, culture, and economics? Okay? And the third task is the same as last time. You need to make sure that you are able to find the countries from the lesson and countries from homework on the blank map. And if you need help, you will use the map on page 216. And here comes the blank map again. So right now, I believe after you are done reading about Spanish-speaking countries of South America, you will be able to identify all countries on this map. Okay, so as for now, thank you very much for your attention and see you next week. Bye.